I've spent a lot of the past 10 years in particular thinking about the church and culture and what it means as Christians to live creatively in the midst of culture. I define culture very simply, and I borrow this definition from Ken Myers of Mars Hill Audio. Culture is what human beings make of the world in both senses. So it's what human beings make in the sense that it's the actual stuff that human beings make of the world. Everything from tables to MacBooks to tilapia when you cook it. Anyway, we take the natural gifts of the world and we culture them, we cultivate them. But it's not just the stuff that we make, it's also the meaning we make, that other sense of making something of the world. So that culture is the human quest to sort out the meaning of a world that seems to ring and resonate with meaning, but does not come with an explanation of its meaning. And culture is just this millennia-long human project to try to find meaning in a seemingly meaningful, yet also seemingly meaningless world. And of course, the way we make sense of the world is by making stuff. That is, we make cultural artifacts that interpret the world. So culture is always about, kind of manufacture of stuff, but it's never just things in themselves. It's things as interpretations, things that make sense. Now, how does this relate to preaching? Well, preaching addresses directly the question of what we make of the world. And the best preaching interacts with culture. That is to say, it is not separated from or divorced from the culture-making project that's going on all around the preacher and his congregation. But the best preaching interacts directly with what are our neighbors making of the world, both in the sense of the stuff they're making. So they're making iPads. What do we make of the iPad? They're making interstate highways. What do we make of the interstate highway? But also in the sense of the interpretations that are on offer in any given culture. And this is why you can't pick up a sermon, preach somewhere else, and preach it again. It's always contextual. At least good preaching is always contextual and always embedded in a particular cultural moment and a particular cultural story. And so preaching joins, it's not something separate from culture. It joins this cultural quest to make something of the world. And the sermon itself is a cultural artifact with a long history, its own story of how people started to make these things called sermons. And so in our preaching, we're also making a cultural artifact, a 20 or 30 or 50-minute address that's designed to enter into culture and remedy something that's missing or offer some interpretation that's missing. There's sometimes a resistance to the idea that preaching is culturally embedded, because I think there's a fear that that means that the truth that we proclaim is culturally relative and changes with whatever the fashions are of culture. Well, of course, the truth is that what we're offering comes entirely from outside of our own culture and our own story, in a sense. It comes from thousands of years ago, a place where none of us have ever lived, a cultural tradition that is very distant to us, and to the extent that we have access to it, mediated through several thousand years of transmission. So there's actually no danger if you're preaching. Now, if you're just giving a motivational talk, certainly that could be completely culturally bound and very relative and sort of relevant in the worst sense. But if you're really preaching, your whole purpose is to bring this event or events in history that come from outside the culture of your congregation into their cultural sphere and offer an alternative to just the dominant values of the culture that they live in. However, if you were to attempt to simply proclaim a truth that's divorced from your cultural context, I think you would find that it does not land. It doesn't connect, because it doesn't answer the world that this particular group of people inhabits. So all preaching has to be committed to something outside of the culture in which it takes place. But also, I think if we're to love our neighbor, it has to be deeply also committed to the culture where the preaching takes place, as a place where God's word could become true again.